Hello and welcome. I'm Brad Bell, the William J. Conity Professor of Strategic Human Resources and also the Academic Director of our Center for Advanced Human Resource Studies, or CAHRS. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our third CAHRS webcast of 2023. Today, I'm joined by three students from our Master's in Industrial and Labor Relations program, or MILAR program. All three have been serving as research assistants for CAHRS this semester, working on the project that they'll be presenting today on the connections between the employee value proposition and benefits. Given all the disruption and change over the past few years, companies are stepping back to reevaluate their EVPs and also to rethink the role that benefits should play in shaping the employee experience. Today's presentation will provide an integrated examination of these topics with the goal of not only sharing best practices, but also exploring what the future may hold in this area. Before I turn it over to the research assistants to share their findings, I'd like to briefly introduce them and also give you an idea of what we'll be doing over the next hour or so. So today our presenters include, first up, Skyler Hill. Skyler is graduating MILAR from Austin, Texas. Following graduation, he will join KPMG as a senior associate in their new Talent and Culture Graduate Leadership Development Program, where he'll be doing rotations in HR and consulting. During his time in the MILAR program, he has served as the VP of Marketing and Communications and also spent the past 2 semesters as a research assistant. He is passionate about improving equity in education around stigmatized subjects such as mental health and disability. And his favorite aspect of the past semester has been learning more about the myriad ways in which companies are working to transform benefits into infrastructure that supports employees' well-being at large. Next, we have Mia Michaelides. Mia is a graduating MILAR originally from Red Hook, New York. Following graduation, she'll also be joining KPMG as a senior associate in their Talent and Culture Graduate Leadership Development Program, where she'll be doing rotations in HR and consulting. During her time in the MILAR program, Mia has served as VP of Student Development for the ILR's Graduate Student Association, a teaching assistant, and also a research assistant. As a CAHRS RA this semester, she has enjoyed getting to speak to partner companies across industries about the signature benefits they offer in the well-being space and the way benefits and DEI intersect. She is passionate about leveraging HR to create more equitable workplaces. And finally, we have Naomi Samuel. Naomi is graduating MILAR from Dallas, Texas. Following graduation, she'll begin her PhD in Management and Organizations at Duke's Fuqua School of Business. She is passionate about investigating creative means to combat structural inequality and has been involved at ILR as both a research assistant and a teaching assistant. Her favorite aspect of the past semester has been hearing the stories of how benefits that might not be widely utilized can offer unique employee populations life-changing outcomes, and also how these benefit stories have impacted the benefits professionals who facilitated those processes and ignited their sense of purpose. I think you'll find that Mia, Skyler, and Naomi have done excellent work this semester in terms of really kind of capturing what's happening in this space of EVP and benefits, and we'll be sharing many important insights with all of you today. So to give you an idea of what we'll be doing over the next hour, our 3 RAs will spend the first 30 to 40 minutes or so sharing information about the research, the key findings that emerged, and important implications. We'll reserve the last 20 minutes to answer any questions that you may have. So I really encourage you throughout today's presentation to submit your questions at any point using the Q&A function here in Zoom. I also encourage you to actively participate in today's discussion through the chat function here in Zoom. I'd like you to think about, how do the research findings that you're hearing compare to what you're seeing in your own organization, and what additional insights or perspectives do you have to offer? Please do share those in the chat as we go through today's discussion. So with that background, I'll turn it over to our research assistants to kick off their presentation.
Thank you for that, Brad. So again, hello everyone, and welcome to the Spring 2023 CAHRS Research Assistant presentation. We appreciate everyone being here today, and we are really excited to share our research with you all on the employee value proposition and benefits, past, present, and future connections. So again, my name is Mia Michaelides, and I'm joined by my 2 co-research assistants.
I'm Skyler Hill. Thank you all so much for being here today. Very excited to discuss this with you all. Yes, I echo that sentiment. Naomi here, and we're excited to jump right in.
So to touch on the agenda of our presentation today, firstly, we'll be sharing the methodology of our research, and then we will head into our three main topic areas, which are the current employee value proposition, also known as the EVP, and benefits, benefit administration, and future benefits and trends. And then we will conclude with some key takeaways. So we'd like to start by offering a business case for benefits and why our research topic is a critical topic for organizational success. Organizations can really leverage benefits to create a competitive advantage over their competitors, both as a company and as an employer. Benefits can be used to advance the EVP and exemplify a desired organizational culture, can help attract and retain top talent and recognize workers, appeal to a multi-generational workforce, and really signal organizational values to employees and their families. So benefits are really a key driver for employee engagement, and higher employee engagement yields stronger company results and productivity. Research shows that organizations with higher employee engagement have 17% higher productivity, 21% higher profitability, and 41% lower absenteeism. So when we asked our company participants which benefits categories their employees cared about the most common answers were compensation, culture, and medical coverage. And all of those factors can really be strong drivers for employee retention. So in order to learn more about how our partner companies are utilizing benefits, we started our research with three main questions. The first being, how are benefits successfully measured, changed, and communicated across employee populations? How do benefits connect with the EVP and strategic aspects of the employee experience? And lastly, what are the future-facing benefits on the horizon? So our methodology for our research began with collecting both quantitative data and qualitative data throughout the semester. We conducted formal interviews as well as beginning a survey. We were really grateful to have 16 partner companies as participants in our study, and we got to speak with 26 HR leaders across 14 different industries. This really led to rich discussion of our topic and offers a unique opportunity for us to hear perspectives from companies with retail workers, production workers, office, unionized employees, which really helped us a lot in our research. So to our participants, we really want to thank you for our insights and your participation in this study throughout the semester. So now that we've shared a little bit about our process, we are going to jump into our first section, our current EVP and benefits.
Thank you, Mia, for setting us up there. So we can start by talking about our partner companies' EVPs and specifically how they're defined and connected to benefits. So just to frame our conversation today, let's go ahead and use this definition of EVP. EVPs being the unique set of benefits that employees receive in return for skills, capabilities, experience, and everything else that they bring to the organization. So when we asked our partner companies about how important benefits were to their respective EVPs, we found some unexpected divergence. So as you can see, the companies were split 40-60 in terms of who regarded benefits as important or unimportant to different extents. And as you can see, the companies who found benefits important generally found them extremely important. So we want to take a deeper dive into how our partner companies are defining their EVP and benefits role with regards to them. And these definitions will hopefully help us see why we kind of see some of this divergence. So before we get into that, firstly, we found across the board that EVP has to do with three kind of factors that boil down to culture, well-being, mission, and purpose. Culture we found cited the most. And then, of course, additionally to that, mission and purpose being working for a purposeful organization with impactful work, and well-being being such a serious topic right now in terms of holistic well-being. So overall, EVPs seem to be the general experience that one has at an organization. But benefits were mentioned as a fourth major aspect of the EVP, but there were two major approaches to where benefits came in. Firstly, we saw benefits as foundational to EVP. So like the quote says, make or break for culture, which was a highly cited aspect of EVP. And so benefits were incredibly influential across those different factors and served as a foundation central to employee experience in EVP. And then there was a second major approach. For other companies, benefits were more so a component and tool to kind of bring the EVP to life, not regarded as a distinct part of the employee experience. So, for example, one partner company considered themselves extremely competitive with benefits, but deemed benefits as kind of separate from the day-to-day employee experience. Another firm stated that for them, competing on the grounds of benefits and compensation just wouldn't be sustainable or realistic, and so relied more on the type of work employees engaged in or mission and purpose, as you see there, as a differentiator. So all that being said, it seems that companies with average or benchmarked or below average, perhaps benefits ranges, might rely on a different aspect of EVP to kind of differentiate themselves as a firm. Then when we take a step back and we asked our partner companies, well, what are these factors that are most influencing this EVP that you advance? We found 4 major categories. And as you can see, culture was kind of the largest, as it is so overarching, from families to stability and flexibility and work, to kind of broader organizational components like DEI and ESG. Culture was very much a prominent part of influencing EVP. Then, of course, benefits, as we mentioned, came up in a variety of ways: healthcare, both at and above requirements, and all forms of compensation and PTO, as you might expect. But then, of course, career development was also a major factor, trajectory, and the nature of the work itself, especially for firms that, as we mentioned, didn't feel they could differentiate themselves with rewards and compensation alone. And then finally, some interesting structural factors came up as well, such as unionization status within the employee population, and just bottom line and cost outcomes related to EVP, as well as just the sustainability of programming. And so overall, we saw this trend also of EVPs really being flexible and honestly dependent on key moments in employees' lives. So speaking of that and flexibility, let's talk a bit more about what change looks like at the benefits level. I'll go ahead and pass it to Skyler.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Naomi. So as Naomi was mentioning, we really examined this link between EVP and benefits. We wanted to see how well this tracked into kind of the change-making process. Are EVPs and benefits changed at similar times, or are they completely independent of one another? And we largely found that there isn't much of a connection between EVP change cycles and benefits change cycles. Now, one of the key reasons that we were hearing for this is that EVP is really closely tied to brand or identity of a company. It needs to be very ingrained in the company's culture in order to be really successful. And changing something that's culturally impactful more often than not will disrupt it a little bit. So it needs to be left untouched for a while in order to do its thing. Whereas benefits can be reviewed very regularly, and you can see changes are made as needed. And that's exactly what we're seeing from our partner companies. More often than not, they will look for benchmark data or employee feedback and then make small tweaks or additions in order to meet employees' needs or remain competitive. And expanding on what changes are based off of in benefits, that benchmarking and employee feedback point, those two are definitely the highest that we're seeing. They're very frequent drivers of change. But we're also seeing things like utilization rates and claim data, being able to figure out how often people are actually utilizing the benefits that we're giving them. Costs are huge. They always will be in the benefits space. And then alignment with culture and values is another big one. Going back to what Naomi said, EVP and benefits have a really great opportunity to align and drive home what the company wants to promote culturally. So we also wanted to dive in a little bit deeper into our different partner companies and examine, what their quote unquote signature benefits are in this vein. And for the purpose of this presentation, we've defined signature benefits as more or less key benefits that differentiate a company from their competitors. So things that ideally on the labor market, potential candidates will be very attracted to, or things that keep employees at the company. Now, we've highlighted a few here, main buckets being financial, leave, medical, and wellness. We will be providing a more expansive list of all of the different signature benefits we heard to our partner companies when we send out our full PowerPoint deck. But for the purpose of this presentation, we wanted to boil it down a little bit. The big thing about these is some are much more common than more common than others. Excuse me. Like different medical plans in the US are required by every competitor or every company, but different companies are pushing them to different levels and offering higher and higher options, like limitless plans, expanded women's health offerings, et cetera. Whereas other benefits are much more unique. We're seeing a lot of potential push for work flexibility, mental health coverage. We're seeing things like emergency childcare services and access to cultural institutions as really good draw factors as well. And I know that I said all of these things are really looked at from a differentiating perspective, but many of the companies who talked about their signature benefits also mentioned they're not just meant to differentiate, they are really made to make employees' lives better in a tangible way. They really wanted the things that their company is associated with from a benefits perspective to impact their employees and make them both better at work and better in their personal lives. Reflecting on what Naomi said earlier about diversity, equity, and inclusion and environmental social governance, we also wanted to examine how those really fit into the offerings that are being provided on the market. And while we didn't see quite as much of a link with ESG and benefits, DEI and benefits is huge. I mean, right now, there is generally a very large focus on DEI, and I'm sure you're hearing that in a lot of discussions in the workplace as well. We're seeing that a lot of these DEI inclusion points occur when creating or reviewing different benefits offerings and policies throughout the benefits lifecycle. And there is a very prevalent aim to achieve either benefits inclusion or benefits equity, depending on where companies are in their DEI journey. We're seeing this both at the domestic level with companies in the US really looking to ensure that different employee groups or different states are given similar benefits. And internationally, we're looking at companies who really want to make sure that they have a standard that's applied to every single workplace on the globe, which we think is really fascinating. And we'll jump into some of the challenges of that later. We're also noticing a very tangible increase of DEI-focused benefits. And some of those I've listed here, specifically like gender-affirming procedures are a little bit more unique, but adoption, surrogacy, disability, these are all being expanded in order to be more equitable to the broad majority of people. And then looking over to best practices, we were able to boil down our partner companies' practices and give some recommendations. The first big one is that we're seeing a lot of DEI benefits execution is really tied to company values, right? This goes back to my point about being on the DEI journey. If a company is really engrossed in DEI and is really trying to push DEI as a big part of their culture or their EVP, they're going to be really on top of this as it relates to benefits. Whereas other companies, maybe it's not quite as high up a priority, maybe we're still securing funding, something like that. You won't see DEI and benefits quite as closely tied together, excuse me. We're also seeing that DEI is a very structural component when applied in a strong way, right? It's not supplementary to certain conversations, but rather included in every single major process when creating or reviewing different benefits. And then with that, we are seeing a push for more retroactive reviews of benefits to make sure that they're DEI compliant. It's great to implement a really solid benefit, but if you're not going back and looking at it 1, 3, 5 years later to ensure that it's still being applied and received equitably, then you might be missing out on some pretty considerable DEI moments. We're also, of course, looking to seek to lift the voices of DEI teams and ERGs and make sure that they're included and wanted in all of these discussions. And then working with supportive partners or vendors that really fulfill your own mission, right? Your money in the market means a lot in fulfilling your own cultural values. So making sure that your partners are also interested in the same things that you are, and also, respecting your employees is really huge. Now, to close out this section, we wanted to look at a lot of the current quote unquote grand challenges that we're seeing in the benefits space. And the biggest one by far is communication. Communication around benefits is incredibly complex. I'm sure if you work in the benefits space, the more benefits you have, the more coverage you'll have and the more offerings you have. But there's so much more complexity. And as you continue to offer different vendors for different benefits and maybe niche offerings, there are just more and more pathways that your end user has to understand. So figuring out how to help employees understand what's available to them and how to get it when they need it are very, very important. Not only, in your employees' lives, potentially they're seeking a really needed benefit, but also just in their appreciation of the company and appreciation of what they're being compensated with as a part of their benefits package. We're also seeing administrative complexity, right? Naomi was talking about before that union versus non-union workforce, a company who may want to have completely equal benefits across all of its employees might be barred by a bargaining agreement that stipulates unionized workers have slightly different benefits. So there's always a consideration there. And then also looking at geographical differences, as I spoke about before, both domestically and global, and also how different cultural expectations fit into the offering and allocation of different benefits. Also, of course, we have cost. Budget is always going to be something to fight against in the benefits space. And rising prices make that even more difficult, especially in areas like healthcare that's legally required, but prices keep rising. And then there is a little bit of discussion around whether or not ROI is a reliable or an unreliable metric for tracking benefits, which again, we'll talk about a little bit later. And lastly here, I just want to highlight that generational differences are very on the mind, especially looking at the far end of the spectrum between baby boomers and Gen Z. A lot of companies who have their benefits structured towards maybe pensions or other offerings that are really attractive to baby boomers are now trying to figure out how do we adapt that to Gen Z and make it attractive without having completely unequitable and separate benefits plans. And that's a very unique challenge. So at this point, I'm going to pass it over to Mia, and she's going to talk about administration.
Thanks, Skyler. So now that we've discussed benefits connection to the employee value proposition, we'd like to shift over to focusing on the way that benefits are allocated and communicated across different employee populations. So firstly, we were very interested in our research in the way that benefits may be experienced differently by employees in different demographics and roles within the organization. So we first asked our participants what the primary factors they used to segment employees when strategizing and allocating benefits. What we found is that organizations use a multitude of factors when strategizing benefits, but the most salient factor of segmentation was employee level, followed by employee tenure and geographic location. So after discussing the factors used to segment employees, we wanted to better understand how much communication was changed based on those factors. And what we discovered is that the majority of our participants changed their benefits communication strategy somewhat based on the employee segment that they are looking to target. So ultimately, what we found is that the major difference in the way that benefits are experienced differently in different employee groups is in the way that they are communicated rather than the way that they are allocated. With some minor exceptions, typically all employees who are benefits eligible had access to the same set of benefits no matter their role in the organization. But the way that benefits were communicated was different based on the factors below. So whether they were a production or a desk employee, union versus non-union, et cetera, we found some variation in communication across these groups. So we also explored the idea of customization in benefits, and we found that this is a relatively divided topic. Some feel that customization is unpractical, especially in the US due to size of organizations, costs, and administrative concerns, while others felt that they really wanted to meet baseline access for all employees in terms of equitable care, and doing that first before moving on to customization. Some felt that customization to a certain extent is necessary for inclusion and creating equity across employee groups. But what we heard most commonly with regards to customization is that since organizations tend to offer so many benefits and work with a multitude of vendors, employees tend to already have a decent amount of choice in what they choose to utilize and engage with. So even if benefits are not being specifically customized to an individual and their unique needs, employees tend to have choice in what they choose to utilize. So it mirrors customization in that sense. So tapping into the idea of communication and the way it's done differently across employee groups, the main differences we saw were across production and retail workers versus office workers. But there is some overlap in communication strategies that were used. So communication is really critical to drive utilization and guide employees to the benefits they need when they need them. And communication is often personalized and changed based on the targeted employee population. So the main driver of these differences is that office workers typically have access to email all day, access to a computer and other technology, while typically production and retail workers are not on email for the majority of their day, and they may not have access to a computer and other technology. So that being said, production and retail communication tends to be more hands-on. The communication tends to be driven from managers and supervisors. There tends to be posters and digital billboards around sites, factories, stores, etc. And they tend to utilize home mailers more. While for office workers, this tends to be more employee-driven, where the employee is seeking out the communication that they are looking for. It's more tech-driven, so emails, Slack for more informal communication, digital newsletters, webcasts, etc. Those are all great ways to engage and communicate with office workers. But there is some overlap in these strategies. Storytelling works really well for any employees. If a particular employee has a really impactful experience with a particular benefit, utilizing employee testimonials is a really great strategy. Informal word of mouth, in-person presentations, as well as at-home marketing are all ways that tend to work for either production or office workers. So as Skyler mentioned, when we were talking about challenges, communication represents the largest challenge that we saw in our participants when it comes to regards to the benefit space. But there are some strategies to combat some of these challenges. So firstly, having many benefits can be overwhelming for employees to understand. So keeping communication short and sweet to avoid overburdening employees with information can be a strategy to combat this. Knowing which benefits apply to you in the moment can be difficult. So a strategy for this is to organize benefits into moments to simplify benefits and connect it back to the EVP. So for example, having on your company intranet a section about family building or retirement, and having all of the relevant benefits that relate to that moment in someone's life can be a great way to organize benefits. As we know, employees already tend to be inundated with communication, so keeping communication limited to weekly or monthly communication just to highlight key information can be important here. Additionally, we saw the importance of involving family members by sending communication via mail to the household. We tend to saw that benefits decision makers often are not the actual employee, but perhaps someone else at home. So involving family members was a really great way to drive utilization. Additionally, by personalizing communication based on employee demographics and data, that can really help the fact that each employee has a distinct need and desire for the way they'd like to engage with benefits. And lastly, guiding employees to a one-stop shop benefits portal can be great because information is sometimes difficult to find. So keeping it in one place for employees to engage with is a great strategy. And finally, we wanted to really understand what worked best for encouraging broad utilization of particular benefits. So some benefits, like certain healthcare treatments, you really hope are not highly needed and not highly utilized by your organization. But for some benefits, especially those linked with positive business outcomes, encouraging utilization is really important. So some of the strategies to do so is through employee testimonials, like I spoke about, having communication come from the top down from leadership, town halls, personalization, automation via auto rollover. These are all great ways to encourage utilization. A relatively newer idea that we saw from our participants is a benefits concierge, whether that's an internal employee or comes from a vendor. Giving employees someone to speak to walk them through the benefits that are available to them and how to best use them can be great in pointing employees in the right direction to get what they need when they need it. And lastly, high impact benefits can really lead to employees driving utilization for other employees themselves. So again, storytelling due to just informal word of mouth or formal storytelling can be great, as well as role modeling from other senior leaders speaking about particular benefits. These methods of encouragement are particularly important for more stigmatized benefits, such as mental health and well-being benefits. We saw that our participants really would like their employees to utilize these benefits, but they tend to be stigmatized. So using storytelling and role modeling can be really great for driving utilization here. But now that we've discussed the ways to best communicate benefits, we'll move on to ways that we can measure success in this space.
Thank you, Mia. So when it comes to actually measuring the success of benefits, we collected information about these three major categories of feedback mechanisms. So there's staple metrics, the ones that we've seen traditionally, there's various employee mechanisms, and then there's external sources of that feedback. So when it comes to the staple metrics, we're all familiar with engagement, utilization, benefits costs, such as total medical spend, but we wanted to call out the last three bullets there. So process and outcome measures could also be a source of valuable feedback collection. So looking at the actual benefit itself and the targeted outcome and tracking that there. So for example, time off granted due to a physical injury and looking at the amount of time that it takes for one to return to work. Then there's also user impact, which we've mentioned with regards to high impact benefits, which we'll get into more in a bit, but actually capturing what the unique individual level impacts are and going in depth there. And then also ROI is something that came up quite frequently, but interestingly in two different ways. So we had some companies that were ROI averse and some that were ROI appreciative. And so for those that were averse, it was for two primary reasons. Firstly, the idea that ROI is kind of counter to the idea of benefits being a principled way to engage in improving employee life, right? The idea being benefits could demand a why, but never an ROI, for example, was stated. And then the other major issue with ROI being that it is difficult to measure and define in some ways. So going off of that, with the ROI appreciative companies, they were able to capture or appreciate the idea of capturing outcomes like productivity payout, and also wanted to learn more about how to better measure ROI for the sake of being able to better argue the case for benefits that could then impact employee lives. With regards to the various employee feedback mechanisms, we mentioned employee resource group feedback, but also we found that social feedback channels, like we mentioned, word of mouth, informal feedback in Slack and such platforms could be really valuable, as well as entrance and exit interviews, for example, because looking at voluntary attrition and the different ways that benefits played a role in one's journey could also be valuable and unique moments of employees' lives to kind of capture that feedback from. And then finally, last but certainly not least, external sources such as vendors, external consultants, and more macro level market trends, kind of out of the company's control, but occurring in society, whether changes in social norms or structures. Those are all different ways of kind of measuring benefits up against what is currently occurring and seeing if they are still appropriate, doing well, and the like. So it's important to discuss the challenges, of course, associated with these various benefits metrics. So the challenges kind of boil down to three major areas: measuring impact, like I mentioned before, and data accessibility and vendor management. So when it comes to measuring impact, it's hard to know sometimes just how impactful benefits are And we know that it's good to understand that, but we better want to capture that link between benefits and key outcomes such as productivity. So strategies to deal with that, for example, might be targeted focus groups or in-depth qualitative interviews for specific benefits to better capture sentiment and all those various factors in there. And then establish more process measures. So connecting that acute link between a benefit and the ways in which it's meant to kind of lead to that ultimate outcome of productivity, employee well-being, and the like. When it comes to that second major bucket of data accessibility, we know that there's a lot of data that we're dealing with, and that can occur or rather cause difficulties in actually visualizing that data and its quality and availability to us. Also concerns about health outcome data was something that came up as well. So strategies to navigate these various issues would be to determine these KPIs up front, standardize key measures where possible, and determine key health claim data to kind of validate and add another way to make more rigorous measures of these various forms of data. And finally, for this last major bucket of just vendor management, we want to make sure that we can standardize all of those various measures. So although there might be the same terms such as engagement, it might be measured in a different way, right, at different vendors and even within the company itself. So that, as well as with data visualization from vendor data, the strategies to navigate that could be just building in-house data warehouses to kind of foster that ownership of the data that you're seeing, and then engage in fees of risk alterations such that there are performance guarantees regardless of how the metrics are defined, just once they're established upfront, to make sure that that risk can be mitigated. So speaking of the difficulty in measuring impact, we came across this thing that we labeled deep benefits. Benefits that are highly impactful, but might not be utilized broadly across employee populations. And so that led us to categorize benefits in these 4 different ways. So firstly, to just establish deep benefits, they are benefits, as I mentioned, that are high impact, low utilization across the employee population. Examples being gender affirming procedures, adoption services, treatments for illness, cancer, et cetera. So these really impactful moments in employee lives that most employees might not experience. Ways to measure that being user impact in those various mechanisms like in-depth qualitative interviews, ultimately leading to things like employee testimonials. As you can see, it's all quite connected. And so coming across deep benefits led us to these other 3 major areas. So these other areas, such as discretionary benefits, might be things that not all employees use, and they might not necessarily be life-changing, but foster everyday wellness, right? So things like employee discounts on cultural institutions, pet insurance, these different signature benefits that are kind of arising that might not be seen as essential, but play a role in kind of impacting the day-to-day experience. We also have core benefits, of course, at the bottom right here, where we see that there are things like healthcare, PTO that are parts of the employee experience that are considered to be critical and highly impactful, that are captured through our typical KPIs like utilization and engagement. At the bottom left there, we have everyday benefits that might not impact us drastically day to day, such as one's 401k. But we definitely track utilization of those, and ultimately down the line, as we know, they can be highly impactful. So that being said, the categories can be fluid, of course. For example, PTO might be highly impactful sometimes it's a day off, and sometimes it can be something like a family reunion where it is very, very highly impactful. So there's a range. So this can look different across categories for the employee. And these categories can look different depending on kind of the size and demographics and structure of one's organizations. But hopefully this framework kind of helps us frame future-facing benefits as we consider and try to formulate ways to measure and communicate the impact of these various benefit types.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Naomi. So now we're going to jump into our last section, which, as Naomi touched on, is the future of benefits, or benefits on the horizon. Before we jump in, I just want to say we only have a few slides left. So this is an open call for questions for our Q&A. If there's anything you have on your mind or that pops in while we're discussing, please feel free to use the Q&A function as a part of this webinar. And we will very shortly be getting to all of those. So looking at benefits in development, we asked all of the partner companies we collaborated with, what are you working on right now? What are you seeing in the market? What are you expecting next 1 to 5 years? And we got to see some really, really interesting benefits that are going to come out soon. One of the biggest buckets that we heard really surrounds comprehensive women's health care. So expanding the quote unquote typical or very blanket coverage healthcare you might get to something that includes egg preservation or various health screenings, menopause support, or some sort of concierge later in life to help you through different health concerns or issues. Really, really interesting to see this on the horizon, and lots of our partner companies were mentioning this, so I would expect it to be coming out soon. We're also seeing a big trend towards equitable family formation. The big thing that we think of is parental leave, right? Lots of companies offer some form of maternity leave. Fewer offer paternity leave. But now we're seeing this shift towards just parental leave in general, no maternity, paternity. And that parental leave can also apply to things like adoption or surrogacy. And companies will also help to cover some of those adoption and surrogacy costs as well. So not only does this provide just greater equity for all family structures, but it also really is tailored towards the LGBTQIA plus families out there. We're also seeing lots of trends towards flexibility in general. I'm sure you've heard stuff about flex time. We're seeing lots of emergency time off, caretaker leave, sabbatical, basically making sure that people aren't necessarily as limited by their set number of accrued PTO days, but rather that they can take a break if they need it. If an emergency comes up and they're out of PTO, they're covered, things like that. Similarly, we're seeing flexible work arrangements. So a flex schedule where you can more or less pick the hours that you work, or flexible weekly format. We're seeing talk of the 4-day work week, and then also the 980 or the 89, depending on your organization, where you only work 9 days out of a 2-week period and you get that extra Friday off. We're also seeing lots of talk related around well-being, and that might be one of the new buzzwords of 2023. We're really seeing this in the health space as well. Things expanding on traditional health benefits to include more exercise reimbursements, mental and physical therapy. We're seeing mental health support, hotlines through the company or vendors. And then financial well-being as well. We're seeing lots of things related around increased financial education and financial planning. So even beyond your typical 401k and your contributions, we're also seeing employers really wanting to encourage their employees to actually understand what they're doing with their money and what a wise financial investment for them looks like. In terms of trends, we saw this split into a market or more large scale bucket and a company or more small scale bucket as well. And looking at the macro side, we're seeing a lot of talk about benefit customization. I know, as Mia touched on earlier, it's definitely a little bit of a controversial topic, but the companies that are passionate about it really want to see what they can do in the customization space, especially because they see potential for savings on the company side and increased buy-in and appreciation for their benefits on the employee side. We're also seeing that startups and vendors are looking to introduce new niche benefits, such as maybe specific healthcare offerings. And that's going to disrupt current vendors a little bit. They might be forced to change their pricing, maybe forced to tack on additional benefits to remain competitive. Yet to be seen, but we're very interested to see how that plays out. We're also seeing that as the labor market remains volatile and power dynamics shift towards employees, it means that benefits are going to remain and become even more of a competitive tool for recruitment and retention. And as I mentioned some on the last slide, we're also seeing this advocacy approach taken where employers are really caring about employees' well-being and advocating that for them as a whole person rather than just a worker. On the company side, we're also seeing this continued emphasis on DEI, and that's going to be wrapped into just about everything that goes on benefits-wise in these companies. And to touch on what Mia was talking about earlier, we're seeing a huge focus on simplified communication, and with that, simplified benefits navigation to make sure that people actually know what they have and how to use it. We're also seeing this well-rounded emphasis on community, meaning, and purpose in the workplace. So it's not just a place where you go to work, but rather a place that supports you holistically, you have people there that rely on you, you're tied in, and it's fulfilling to be a part of the community. And then we're also seeing those increased financial perks and introduction of some Eastern medicine coverage, which is very exciting. So in conclusion, we just want to end by really reiterating that intentional benefit strategies can really connect a company with their EVP, and that can then have an effect on employee livelihood and foster competitive advantage throughout the entire company and the market. Benefits really, really, really have a high potential to support employees in the moments that matter. And that's what employees are going to remember. Benefit strategies also are focusing more on equitable support and things like flexibility than ever before. And they serve as a very strong sign that companies are shifting their organizational values and commitments to overall well-being, employee purpose, and of course, DEI. So with all of that in mind, we close our presentation. Thank you so much. We will now open it up for any questions you might have.
Great. Thanks so much, Skyler, Mia, Naomi. Excellent presentation. Certainly a lot of great information, a lot to digest here in a short presentation. And to that end, one of the questions that did come in was, would we be sharing out a copy of the presentation? We will be doing that. We'll share a recording as well as a copy of the deck that the research assistants went through today. So if you want to go back and kind of dig into it a little bit further, you'll have an opportunity to do so. So with that, let's take a few of the questions that have come in. If you haven't yet submitted a question or thought that you had, I encourage you to do so. One of the questions, kind of a high level question for anyone who wants to kind of take it is, asking, what was most surprising to you, going into this research, what maybe thoughts or hypotheses did you have that were, kind of rejected as you started talking to companies and heard, how they're approaching, benefits?
That's a great question. I can start with that one. I think something that we found positively surprising was the fact that benefits decision-making can really be more granular than I think we expected. I think we expected any change or a new offering in the benefits space to really be driven by a ton of employee data or needed to be utilized by every single employee in the organization. And some of benefits are used in that way. But for example, we heard that just hearing from a few employees that their health plan only covered hearing aid replacements every 3 years when really need to be replaced every 1. Just hearing that small story from a handful of employees then drove that decision, and there was an update in the healthcare coverage. So I think it was positively surprising to learn that some of those deep benefits that Naomi was talking, where there is a strong impact and need, but from a smaller amount of employees, that was still a really great way to drive different benefits decisions. So it was nice to hear that even benefits that are only really needed by a handful of people are still really being focused on in the space.
Great, very interesting. So another question that came in as you were presenting earlier was, historically, some companies have segmented populations by salary level. You didn't have that in your kind of list, although you did have kind of employee level. You had kind of, white collar versus blue collar, which is going to be highly correlated with salary. But I guess, as you talk to companies, did you find that kind of as they looked at level or some of these other characteristics, was salary kind of consideration there?
That's a good question. I would say it came up in different ways than you might expect. So sometimes you might see, for example, as you rise to the executive level, which tracks with salary, as you mentioned, the options for various packages might actually narrow in some ways, or it might be different types of compensation offered. And something else that came up was kind of financial literacy, right? And so once you get to the executive level or higher salary, you might have a different financial well-being package than you would at a different level, where the goal might be more so to just offer like basic financial literacy, as opposed to someone to help manage, clearly a different financial state of being. So I'd say that it came up in that regard.
Yeah, I was thinking about the executive level as well. I mean, certainly we see whole suite of perks and benefits and things that, at that level that maybe is differentiated from the rest of the organization. And again, highly correlated with salary. Another question is around, as you surveyed your partner companies, were you really focusing on the US, or did companies tend to respond with a more global view of their benefits?
I would say so. The majority of the people we spoke to were within the US. So I think that the majority of our research is relatively US centric. But we also got a global perspective from some of our multinational participants. And it's an interesting frame because obviously healthcare in the US looks very different than it does in Europe and other countries across the globe. So for example, the healthcare coverage you're receiving in the US is communicated much differently than it is in the UK, for example, where that's government funded versus employer funded. So I think that that could be another entire research project in itself. But there are some big discrepancies. I think in the UK, for example, from the participants we heard from there, they heard about their healthcare once and then that was kind of it. It's a much simpler. We're in the US, just due to the way that healthcare is paid for in this country, it's much more complex. So I think that globally, this conversation would look much different.
Yeah, certainly. So an interesting question is kind of around the intent or motivation. And there, the question is, did you sense that companies, particularly maybe with some of these more unique or signature benefits, are they really excited to make these changes, or is there a sense that they're just really trying to keep up with the marketplace and competitors in terms of offering what they think is necessary to attract and retain employees today?
Yeah, I would be happy to talk to that. I think we have seen a lot of excitement related to the stuff that we've been talking about. And Brad, to your point there, like there always is going to be some pressure from the market to make sure that your benefits are competitive. There's always going to be, some kind of fire to fight in that regard. But a large part of what we were discussing with our partner companies seemed to be coming from a place of excitement. To Mia's example earlier, talking about that change in hearing aid coverage, like the benefits professionals we've been working with are genuinely in love with finding opportunities like that where they can both identify a need and meet it. And for a lot of them to be rolling out these larger, more exciting benefits that are going to be improving equity, improving healthcare options for different groups of people. It seems like there's a lot of high energy and excitement for sure. It doesn't just seem like market pressure, which I think is really exciting.
Great. Another interesting question, you talked a lot about things that companies are adding, kind of, these newer benefits. The question is, did you come across anything that companies seem to be phasing out or maybe putting less emphasis on, maybe because they're not as relevant, maybe they're not being utilized as much or becoming less popular or less differentiated? Anything in that kind of, what are we taking away as maybe we're adding all of these newer things?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that as well. There were definitely some, although I will say the subtraction or the subtracted benefits were definitely much more few and far between than that addition benefits. But one that really comes to mind is kind of the pension platform, especially for privatized workplaces. We're seeing, going back to our discussion before of generational differences, we see pensions being really attractive for the baby boomer generation and workplaces that have a large baby boomer population. Whereas Gen Z doesn't see that nearly as commonly anymore. I mean, pensions are pretty hard to come by unless you're working in the government per se. So those companies are figuring out how to either maybe repackage pensions as something that's more attractive, or gradually phase them out in favor of another benefit that's going to be more competitive and more attractive to those younger generations. So that's definitely the big one that comes to mind.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I can imagine it's hard. I mean, the sense of entitlement, once you have a benefit, it's harder to take it away than it is to certainly add those going forward. I think this speaks to your question, maybe on the flip, your answer, Skyler, on the flip side, which is, which of the benefits that you discussed do you think are really most important to Gen Z recruits? Is pay the primary driver? Is it flexibility? what are the kind of key benefits that companies seem to be really targeting to those new entrants into the workforce?
Yeah, I would say that based on research that we've seen, Gen Z and millennials really care about advancement as they're starting out in their career, but also very much so on flexibility. So I think that those flexible workplace benefits are going to be really big for Gen Z. The opportunity to work from home, craft your own work week, et cetera. I think that that's going to be huge in attracting and retaining Gen Z. But I think they really care about, their own personal development and feeling a sense of purpose. That's something we've seen to be huge, that Gen Z really values, like they are feeling like they're contributing to a positive mission and having a really sense of strong purpose within an organization. So I think the competitive rewards and salary will definitely be important continually for any generation. But Gen Z, I think flexible work and also advancement and a sense of purpose is going to be biggest for them.
Great. So I think we're almost up here on time. Maybe one final question. I think this is a good one to wrap up on. It came through the chat, which is, if you were kind of launching phase 2 of this research, what area would you really want to dig into? What area really stood out to you as this is where we'd really like to go to learn more because we found this part of the research fascinating, or maybe it was the area that had more kind of ambiguity or unanswered questions in it?
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that we were all really excited by the intentional intersect between DEI and benefits, and how benefits uniquely are just such a unique way to impact employees' livelihood. Based on today's conversation, though, I think that something that would be interesting is talking about invisible benefits and essentially unplanned occurrences, interactions, and aspects of working somewhere that still would categorize under benefits and things that are meant to impact the EVP in some ways. Especially at the executive level, just idiosyncratic things that we might not know and are a bit more hidden, but are benefits that are occurring. And what does that mean in terms of equitability and things like that? So just, I would say, the hidden types of benefits, and then again, diving more into the benefits and the types of benefits that seriously impact the trajectory of an employee's life, both inside and outside of an organization.
Yeah, great answer. I mean, certainly, I think an interesting area, probably where there hasn't been as much attention because they tend to be, more sparsely utilized across organizations. So we're up on time. So I'd like to thank Skyler, Mia, Naomi for a great presentation, as well as all their work this semester. As I said, we'll be sharing out a copy of their presentation as well as a recording of today, and would welcome you and encourage you to share it with other colleagues who may be interested in this work. I also just want to mention quickly that we have our last CAHRS webcast for the first half of the year next Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern time. That will be on talent management, basically managing talent in a ever-changing world, and we'll be presenting out findings from a series of working groups that we've done this semester on various issues surrounding talent in today's environment. So please do attend that event, and hope to see you at other CAHRS events in the future. Thanks again for attending today, and take care.